Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Grace. It is lovely to have you here. Today I'm going to be doing the mid-year freakout tag for the first time. I started my booktube channel around the start of this year, so I've never been on booktube around the middle of the year. I've watched a lot of these in the past. If you have ever watched any booktube videos before, you've probably heard of the mid-year freakout tag. It's basically just a list of questions that help you to check in with yourself and your reading halfway through the year, see how you're doing, if you're hitting your goals, if there are any books that have fallen by the wayside that you really would like to get to in the second half of the year, and just have a bit of a catch-up. Before we dive into the questions, I have a couple of statistics. So, as of filming this on the last day of June, the 30th, so properly halfway through the year, I have read 29 books, and I should have finished at least one more by the end of the day, I think. So hopefully should be 30 books in the first half of the year. Now, for reference, I read 34 books last year for the whole year, and that was the most books I've ever read in one year before. So this has been a big reading year for me so far, and I think that is largely because of my joining booktube. I felt a lot more motivated to read. I've read books for videos. I've had this community of readers around me cheering me on and recommending me new books, and I am really enjoying reading this much. But I will also say that it hasn't been the best quality reading year that I've had. I don't really give books star ratings, it just stresses me out too much. But I wouldn't say that I've read a 5-star or a new favourite book so far this year. I've read some really great books, but none have quite reached that for me yet. And I've read a decent number of books that I probably enjoyed at the time, but I am beginning to forget about already, I think. So I would like to be a little bit more choosy in the second half of the year, I think, and lean a bit more into my mood reading again, because that is the way that I naturally am drawn to books. I am definitely a mood reader. To no one's surprise, my most read genre so far this year has been fantasy. It is my favourite always, but I think I have broadened my reading a little bit more this year. I've read quite a lot of romance and some more contemporary and historical novels. I've branched out a little bit more than I usually would do from just reading fantasy. In terms of format, I have listened to a lot of audiobooks so far this year. I think 19 audiobooks and 10 physical books. Audiobooks have really been a discovery for me recently and have helped me to read a lot more because I can be reading whilst doing things, and also I just read very slowly. My natural pace is quite slow, so a lot of the time an audiobook will just be faster than my normal reading speed if I was reading something physically. But I do wonder if I need to be a little bit more picky about the books that I listen to, because I don't think audiobooks are always the best way to read a book, for me at least. Especially with fantasy, I think often I will enjoy it more if I read it physically, and I can go back more easily and reread parts of the world building that I didn't quite understand on first listen or first read. So I would like to try to skew that a little bit back towards physical books, because we're currently on 2/3 audiobooks, which is a lot. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for audiobooks, but I'm really just trying to figure out what works for me. But anyway, let's get into the first question, which is a big one to start off with, and that is, what is the best book that I have read so far this year? Now, I do not have one. I can't pick one. I do not have one absolute favourite book that I've read this year, but I have 3 that I have really enjoyed and that have pushed boundaries for me and I've loved the writing styles of. Definitely a top 3. The first of those was The Undertaking of Hart and Mercy by Bannen. This is my boyfriend's favourite book ever, and he has been wanting me to read it for quite a while now, so he's very happy that I really enjoyed it when I finally did. This is a fantasy romance set in kind of a cowboyish Wild West type setting that still feels quite modern, but with some fantastical twists to it. One of which being that there are zombies, basically. They're called something else, but they're basically zombies. And one of our main characters is a marshal, and the other main character is an undertaker who deals with the bodies of these zombies that have been left behind and brought in by the marshals. So of course these two have to interact, but they really don't get on until one day Hart, our marshal, is feeling so lonely that he decides to reach out anonymously through a letter just into the world and that letter ends up in the hands of our Undertaker, Mercy. So this is very much kind of a fantasy you've got mail situation. I had a lot of fun with this one. There were a lot of lovable characters in here with some great personality quirks. They were really funny, and I found the world building really enthralling in here. It to me was the perfect blend of wacky and full of weird quirks, but not so complicated that it had to be info dumped. The way that Megan Bannen introduces the world in here, it's just a perfect example of world building to me. So definitely one of my top 3 so far. The next book in my top 3 is The Illumination of Ursula Flight by Anna Marie Crowhurst. This was recommended to me by my boyfriend's sister, and I really didn't know what to expect going into this one, other than that it's a historical fiction, which I haven't read that much of in the past. But this is the story of Ursula Flight, a girl who wants to grow up to be a part of the world of theatre, especially they would love to be a playwright. But of course, during this time in the 1600s in the UK, women couldn't really just do that. They had to settle down and get married. This is one of those books which I've talked about several times on here. I really enjoy when a book just follows a character's life rather than having a beginning, middle and end in the classic sense. I much prefer a character-focused narrative a lot of the time, and this is definitely that. But the thing that really surprised me was the writing formats in here. This is not just written in classic prose, a lot of it is written in script format, in lists, in diary entries, in letters, in so many different ways, and I found that so refreshing and interesting, and it allowed the main character's voice to really shine through in here, and she was really funny. This has definitely made me want to get to more historical fiction in the future. And the third of my favourite books so far this year is one that I decided to get out from the library recently, and that is The Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Roshani Chokshi. I actually just posted the vlog where I read this one, so if you want more in-depth thoughts, you can find those in this library reading vlog that I did. But I loved the writing in this one. It was so sumptuous and atmospheric. I don't really read books that are that creepy most of the time, but for some reason this one was calling to me, and clearly my intuition was right because I had a great time with this book. I did say in that video that I do understand this wouldn't be for everyone because the writing style is strong. It's very lyrical and flowery, and I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but thankfully I really enjoyed that, and also I think it worked especially here because this is the story of a marriage in which the husband is obsessed with fairy tales. It's what they study, and they end up through their research meeting a very wealthy woman who is almost part of a fairy tale herself. And she makes him promise not to ask questions about her history, her past, but when they end up having to go back to her family home because her aunt falls ill, he begins to unravel a little bit of her history and find some dark secrets in her past. And the fairy tale themes in here, the obsession and need to live the most poetic life possible, to me made the writing makes sense because all of these characters spoke that way and lived their lives that way and believed that they could do anything they want as long as it was beautiful and poetic in some way. So to me, it all just sat perfectly. So those are my 3 favourite books of the year so far. The next question is the best sequel I've read so far this year. And I'm gonna be honest, I've read a few sequels, not many, and I haven't loved any of them. But I am currently halfway through Emily Wilde's map of the Otherlands, and I am really enjoying this so far. I have ranted about this series many times on my channel, and I'm finally reading the second one. If you haven't heard about the Emily Wilde series, this is a period fantasy set in a version of our world in which fairies are known to exist, and the main character, Emily Wilde, is an academic in the study of fairy. I would call this a light academia fantasy, which is just perfectly my vibe. The main character is grouchy and obsessed with her books and doesn't really understand people, and then she has an academic rival who is is very charming, great with people, but also pretty lazy and a little bit stuck up sometimes. And I just love them both as characters. I love their flaws and the quirks of personality that they have, and the way that this is told. This is told in epistolary diary entries, so you really feel Emily's voice coming through. So yeah, I know it's cheating, but I'm gonna have to say that this is my favorite sequel that I am reading so far this year. I can't see myself not really enjoying this by the end. Fingers crossed I haven't just jinxed it for myself, but so far, really enjoying Emily Wilde's map of the Otherlands. The next question is, what is a new release that I haven't read so far this year but would really like to get to soon? And I think there are several, but the one I'm going to pick for this one is The Honey Witch by Sydney J. Shields. This is another of those period drama fantasies. I think this is set during kind of the Regency era. This is about a woman called Marigold who has always preferred nature and magic to the rules of society and courtship. So when her grandmother whisks her away to a mysterious little island to train her up to be the next Honey Witch, she is thrilled. But there is a price to all this, which is that no one can fall in love with a Honey Witch. And this gets tested when Lottie, a grumpy skeptic who doesn't believe in magic, shows up on her doorstep, and Marigold can't help but want to prove her wrong. So this is a sapphic romance, I believe. It just sounds like all of my favorite things. It's so cottagecore in vibe. Look at this cover. It seems very cozy. Gives me almost a fantasy Stardew Valley kind of feeling, which, incredible. This just sounds like it should hopefully be my cup of tea. Next up we have the most anticipated release for the second half of 2024, and this, for me, is a no-brainer. There are several books that I'm really pumped for, but one that is just so perfectly my vibe and I cannot wait, and that is A Dark and Drowny Tide by Allison Saft. This is the story of a folklorist in a magical world who is on an expedition to find a fabled spring, but when her mentor is murdered aboard the ship they're traveling on, the only person that our protagonist Lorelei has to turn to is her academic rival Sylvia, and they have to work together to solve this mystery. This is a story on the open seas, a story of folklore, a sapphic, academic rivals to lovers, a mystery to solve. It just, the vibes seem perfect. This is the UK cover, but I will pop up the US cover here as well because it's also stunning. I just have such high hopes for this book, and I've heard really great things about the author's writing before as well. I haven't read any of their other books, even though I've had A Far World of Magic by them on my shelves for quite some time now. This just sounds like it was made for me, so fingers crossed it sticks the landing. The next question is my biggest disappointment so far this year, and unfortunately I'm gonna have to give this one to Sisters of Sword and Shadow by Laura Bates. I had really high hopes for this one. The premise is basically, what if during Arthurian times, instead of the classic Knights of the Round Table, there was a group of women knights? And already, sign me up, that sounds perfect for me. But unfortunately this just didn't give me what I was hoping for. The stakes were never that high in here, and a lot of the characters made choices that didn't really make sense to me. And it also felt like it was written by someone who didn't understand young adult fantasy, which is what this was. I know that Laura Bates has written a lot of feminist non-fiction in the past, so I don't know if maybe this just wasn't a genre they were accustomed to, but they kept hinting towards certain tropes and certain plot beats that heavily implied, when you know anything about the young adult fantasy genre, that certain things would happen, and then there was not the follow-through that I was expecting. So unfortunately this was quite an unfulfilling read for me, and I was really sad because I had really high hopes for it. I just want to read more books about women in cool suits of armor with swords. Now on the other hand, the next question is the biggest surprise. Now this is heavily overlapped with my favorite books of the year. I find that books that I love tend to be books that surprise me and books that I maybe don't have that high expectations for but really exceed those expectations. So for those reasons I'd say again The Illumination of Ursula Flight, just because the formatting in this one was so out of the box and wacky, and I really enjoyed that and didn't see it coming, and it taught me something as someone who wants to write myself. This definitely opened my eyes to how I could break those conventions and rules that we put in place for classic prose in books. So that was definitely a surprise for me. And then again also Last Tale of the Flower Bride, just because this is very much not my usual genre. I wouldn't usually gravitate to something this spooky, even though I know for a lot of people this isn't that spooky anyway. So I really surprised myself by having a great time with this one, even though it was very much out of my comfort zone. Now the next question is new favourite author. Now I have not read more than one book by any new authors this year. I've read a lot of variety. I think the only person I've read more than one book by is Holly Black, and I'd already read the Cruel Prince series last year. So again, I would say the 3 authors of my top 3 reads of the year that I mentioned, but I would also add to this list Kingfisher. I read Paladin's Grace at the start of this year, and I'd heard a little bit about Kingfisher before, but I was really surprised by how funny their writing is. This book made me laugh out loud many times, and the romance in here was really cozy but quirky. There was a dark twist to the plot, but it didn't counterbalance the coziness in this. This just felt very unexpected in a lot of different ways. And although this wasn't necessarily my absolute favourite book of the year, I did really enjoy it, and I'm really intrigued to read the rest of Kingfisher's work because I know they have a huge catalogue already. I'm not sure if I will read their horror, even though it is cozy horror ostensibly, just because, as we know, I'm a wimp. But a lot of their other books I'm really intrigued by. I have Thorne, which I think is meant to be a twisted, odd retelling of Sleeping Beauty from the perspective of the sprite set to keep watch over them. I definitely want to finish the Paladin's Grace series. I know that they have a book coming out soon called A Sorceress Comes to Call, which is a Goose Girl retelling. That sounds really interesting. I just find their writing really intriguing, and I think that there is a lot of promise generally in their vibe for other books that I will really enjoy. So I will definitely be keeping an eye out for more books from Kingfisher. Now the next question is newest fictional crush, and honestly I don't know if I have one from this year. I don't get them too often. A lot of the time when I read a romance, it's more that I will enjoy those 2 characters together. I think they'll be good for each other if it's a good romance, and they will both be characters of their own rather than one of them being flat enough that I can just self-insert, you know? But I would say, again, Emily Wilde might have to take this one because Wendell is not a new crush, but he continues to be so. He's just a very charming man. He's so smart. He's an academic, even though he's really lazy and never does anything with it. I like his snark. I think he's really funny. So, I mean, he's just gonna have to take this spot. Maybe I'll find a new fictional crush to be obsessed with in the second half of the year. I would love to hear if you guys have found one. What would you recommend to find a new fictional crush? Because I definitely haven't really experienced that in probably a few years now. I think maybe since Howl's Moving Castle, which again, Wendell is very Howl coded, so it makes sense that we ended up here. But the next question is easier to answer, and that is newest favourite fictional character, and that without a doubt has to go to Duckers, Penrose Duckers from the Undertaking of Hart and Mercy. The main character Hart, who I mentioned earlier, the marshal figure, ends up begrudgingly getting an apprentice, and their name is Duckers. Of all things, I adore them. He's so funny but earnest. He has such a big heart, so much so that he even managed to weasel his way into Hart's heart, even though he's a grumpy old soul. And oh, he's just so lovable and endearing and a bit of a rapscallion, but in the best way. Honestly, this book would be worth it just for Duckers. Next question is a book that made me cry, and again, Undertaking of Hart and Mercy did, but just for some variety. I think the only other book that has made me cry this year so far has been Those Who Wait by Haley Cass. Now this is an absolute brick of a sapphic fantasy novel, a contemporary fantasy, which was really hyped up on online spaces, book talk especially, I think at the start of this year, and I just wanted to know what the hype was about. Now, would I say this is the best written book I have ever read? No, but it did make me cry on the bus and then again in a park, so take from that what you will. It definitely left me emotionally invested. I would not call it a perfect book by any means, but if you enjoy contemporary romance, sapphic discovery, kind of more of a friendship that develops into a romance, I think this is worth a shot. And I enjoyed the audiobook. I think I probably would have struggled to get through such a dense long book if I'd read it physically, but I sped through that audiobook. So that is Those Who Wait by Haley Cass. Now, the next question is a book that has made me happy. And honestly, I kind of struggled with this one. I think I've read quite a few sad books, or at least bittersweet books so far this year. But I would say, again, Paladin's Grace by Kingfisher really made me laugh a lot, to the point where my boyfriend started giving me weird looks. And another one that I'm actually still reading right now, but I think I should be able to finish by the end of the day, is The Secret Sunshine Project by Benjamin Dean. This is the story of a 12-year-old girl whose family have to move out of London into a little village with their grandmother after their father passes away. And this is obviously very upsetting for everyone involved, but especially our main character Bee's older sister is really struggling, partly because this means that the family will have to miss London Pride. And she came out to her parents just before London Pride last year, and it was the last time that they had a wonderful family day out together with their father well and happy in there. And the fact that he's no longer around and they're going to have to miss this source of joy and warmth for her is really dragging her down. So Bee decides she's going to do her best to cheer her up by hosting a little local pride in this little village that they have had to move to. Now, there are a lot of obstacles in her way with some small-minded people in this little village, but this book has so many wholesome, joyous moments in it and little moments that have made me laugh. The grandmother that they move in with is awesome. I love her. She stands up to the local busybody like no one else will. She's so snarky and sassy and confident, and I want to be like her when I grow up, but I know that I won't be. So yeah, this has definitely put a smile on my face several times already, and I think that the ending will probably be very wholesome and lovely, and I cannot wait. Next up, we have the most beautiful book that I have bought so far this year. Now, I had more than I would like to say to choose from. I have been better in the last couple of months in buying much fewer books than I was before when I worked back at a bookstore, but this is one that I pre-ordered before I left, and that is Can't Spell Treason Without T by Rebecca Thorne. Now, this is already gorgeous, but the sprayed edges on this one, it's dragons. It doesn't have anything on the hardcover on the front, but the spine is also gorgeous. This is actually the book that my boyfriend is reading right now, and he's really enjoying it as well, so I'm excited to get to this one. A lot of people have compared this to Legends and Lattes. This is meant to be a very cozy fantasy, but from what Chris has been telling me, a little bit more goes on in this one than in Legends and Lattes. This is about a couple, two women. One is a bodyguard to the current monarch and has to deal with a lot of assassination attempts, and the other one is kind of the big wizard of the era, very powerful woman. But one day they decide they've had enough of all of the stress and the danger, and they just want to live a cozy life together. So they try their best to set up a little tea shop somewhere else and leave their past behind. But of course, it's never quite that simple. I've been interested in this one for quite some time. I know that it was self-published initially and then it was traditionally published like this over in the UK recently. But honestly, the review that I'm getting from Chris has made me extra interested to get to this one soon because he's really enjoying it. So let's bump this one up the list. Can't spell treason without T. And the last question we have, a bit of a catch-all, is what other books do you really need to get to by the end of the year? Now, of course, the answer is just all of them, but that is not possible, unfortunately, so I have a couple that I really, really want to get to before the end of the year. The first one being Morgan Is My Name by Sophie Keach. Now, I won't ramble too much because I've already mentioned this enough on my channel, but this is a feminist retelling of Morgan Le Fay, or Morgana, from Arthurian legend. And I find Arthurian legend fascinating and I really enjoy feminist retellings. So logically, this should be perfect for me. And I think that the sequel either just came out or is about to come out soon, so I definitely need to get on this one. And the other one that it is honestly embarrassing that I haven't read yet is Gideon the Ninth. Again, I've mentioned this many times now. I really, really want to get to this soon. All I know is it is lesbian necromancers in space and a lot of people are obsessed with it. I've had a lot of comments from people who watch my channel saying that they think I would really love this or that they absolutely adored it. I think I'm just nervous and I need to kick those nerves out of the way because they're getting in the way of me reading possibly a new favourite book, maybe. No pressure. I also own the first 3 books in this series and I haven't read the first one, which is embarrassing. So definitely by the end of the year, this is happening. Gideon the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. So that brings us to the end of my first mid-year book freakout tag. I just want to say a quick thank you while I'm here to everyone who has been so kind and welcoming as I've started this little booktube channel, because it's basically been running for the first half of this year. I really enjoyed making these videos and just having a space to rant about all of my favourite books, and I really hope that you have been enjoying them too. A lot of you have been just so nice to me in the comments and I've loved hearing your recommendations and what you've been reading. So yeah, just thank you for making me feel so welcomed into this space, and I hope that this has been a cozy, welcoming space for you too. I would absolutely love to hear what your favourite book of the year has been so far and how your reading year has been so far. Have you managed to reach your reading goals? Have you been struggling? Have you been in a slump? Have you read a lot of new books that you've loved, or have you been struggling to find that secret sauce? Catch me up, I'd love to hear how your reading is going. So thank you for watching. I will see you in another video very soon. Bye bye.